Hello and welcome to the Place for Connection podcast. Connection is the cure. Connection to self, connection to others, connection to your body and connection to the environment. Today I'm joined by Megan Pasierbek.
Pasierbek, yeah.
Pasierbek, I should have checked that, who's going to talk to me all things internal family systems. So first we'll start a little bit about you and what brought you on the journey to start working in this space of internal family systems.
Yeah, so I've had a kind of really, lifelong journey with my own mental health, and I had always kind of been interested in personal development, and I'd been in and out of therapy since I was maybe 21, and then I was kind of on a bit of a deeper journey at the time. I discovered internal family systems in 2021 when I was part of like a container that was for women or for people who'd struggled with, say, eating disorders or food addiction. And I'd been in that container, and then there was this opportunity to do this IFS course, which looking back was basically the same content as my level 1 training. But prior to that, this is a big part of my story, so I'll just add in. In 2019, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2. And after struggling with depression on and off for most of my life, I went on the medication roller coaster. And then in 2021, there was considerations for me conceiving. So I'd gone off the medication. And it just so happened that the week I was going off the medication, I stumbled across a book called Med-Free Bipolar. And I thought, hey, can't hurt to read this. So I did. And it was this woman in America she claimed to be a completely recovered psych patient for 10 years and had much more severe bipolar than what I'd ever experienced, but had done so through supplementation. So I took the list of supplements to my naturopath, who put me on them, and I just felt so much better on the sups than I ever did on the meds.
Wow.
And it wasn't really an intention to stay off them, but I just found the sups had worked for me. And then through that experience, and then also discovering IFS and noticing how much of a shift that I experienced. Like, I'd done lots of therapy, but I hadn't really started to heal my trauma properly. And I was just starting to notice how much more regulated I felt and how much more present I could be with people. And it was such an amazing shift. And while I was studying it, like just in this group, they said, form a mastermind if you would like to practice. So we did. And I met with these women every single week, and we would practice IFS for up until I think the end of 2023, we kept practicing. And it just kept showing me more and more layers, like just peeling back these layers. And through that journey and healing a lot of my trauma, because I did grow up in a family with a lot of intergenerational trauma, and there was just a lot of physical and emotional abuse. To be able to heal a lot of that and process a lot of my grief, I truly attribute that to the fact that, like, today I haven't had a single bipolar episode since January 2020.
Wow.
And I think that if I walked into a psychiatrist's office today, I wouldn't even meet the criteria anymore.
Wow.
And it was just after that experience, and then in April 2023, I think it was, I was doing a journey. And in that journey, came through was, you need to share your story and you need to go and study IFS. Like, you need to do this. This is kind of what you were put on earth to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so curious about what you were doing before as well, but I feel like that's probably my own ego being like, so how did this change your life? Because I know for lots of people, when they go on a journey and they have an experience, that can change their entire pathway. But I feel like that's kind of another conversation. I'm curious, if you were to try and explain IFS, internal family systems, to someone who had never heard of it, didn't know what it was, how would you do that?
So internal family systems is built on the belief that we are made up of all these parts of ourselves, and a really relatable way to explain that to someone that's never heard, I say, that part when you wake up in the morning, there's a part of you that wants to get up and be productive, but there's also another part of you that wants to stay in bed for another hour. They're just parts of you, because a lot of people will hear it and go, is that family therapy? Or if they hear about the parts, they're like, does that mean I have multiple personalities?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I just explain it in that way, and then explain the different types of parts. So the self, so that's who you really are underneath all your conditioning and your trauma. And then we have protector parts, So they might show up as big emotions or thoughts that you have about, like, it might be judgments, it might be something that you're doing in your life that might feel like it's self-sabotage or it's not helpful. We do have also protector parts that are very helpful. And then you've got exiles underneath, which is kind of like your wounded inner child parts. And generally our protectors can be running our lives most of the time, but they're trying to protect those exiles underneath. And IFS helps you to heal those parts so you can become more self-led. So you can become the more naturally confident and calm version of yourself and the more responsive rather than reactive.
Yeah. Yeah, I myself have worked with a patient with dissociative identity disorder, and once I was introduced to internal family systems, the dissociative identity disorder presentation made so much more sense to me. And I'd almost wished I'd learnt to think of dissociative identity disorder from the framework of internal family systems, because what it is essentially when people relate to themselves as different people, right? And those different people operate at different times, and usually the person isn't kind of aware of what's happening at the time until after the fact. Sometimes they can be conscious, mostly unconscious of what happens. And I think when I stumbled across internal family systems, I was like, oh, this is what's happening. It's like a part of them is in operation, but perhaps their psyche isn't integrated enough to be able to consciously discern what that part's doing, what their function is. But just so interesting. Like, in terms of your own experience of internal family systems, when was the point when you really had a breakthrough moment and had a sense of, oh, actually this isn't like just a neurological problem I have, which we tend to think of bipolar affective disorder as, like this is a neurological problem, it's genetic, you can't change it. What was the breakthrough moment for you?
I feel like there's been so many. Yeah. I think reading the Med-Free Bipolar was a big moment for me, because when I was diagnosed, it was like such an ego death, because it was like, oh my gosh, who am I? Has everything I've done up until this point been a mood episode? And like, I was so afraid of the stigma, and, I was so afraid to tell people, and I held so much shame around it. And I wouldn't say IFS necessarily got me to have those breakthroughs with the bipolar as such. It was just, I guess, a noticing, when you look back at something or you're having an experience and you're like, wow, I would have reacted really differently 12 months ago. I'm actually really regulated right now. Oh, wow, I don't have shame around this anymore. Like, it just, you notice those changes in yourself, and you feel like you can be you. You feel like you can be your authentic self. And if other people make judgments of that, like, that's their stuff, and you don't kind of buy into that anymore. I feel like that's probably been the biggest thing. And then just like those small moments of just noticing, especially after being on medication. When you're on medication, like, most meds didn't work for me at all. If anything, they made me worse. Lithium was helpful. When I went on lithium, I was severely depressed. But the thing was, it took away the bad feelings, but it also took away the good. Like, it takes away the joy. It feels like you're walking through a life with a veil on. And suddenly I could feel the joy again, and I could feel those emotions and be present with them and not overwhelmed. And like, there's so many little gifts, like, along the way. I wouldn't say there's one specific breakthrough, but just lots of them. But learning IFS and knowing, like, what you were saying about the dissociative parts, like, that, I love that about IFS, is that it is non-pathologizing, and
it's amazing.
Look at all the parts of you, and say if it's like a symptom of bipolar, like, it's just a protector part, and there's generally very good reason as to why these people are protected by these parts of themselves.
Oh, I have someone very close to me in my life who has a diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder and has huge mood disturbance, and it just makes me want to go, just go and see Megan. And I think that for people who are pathologized in this way, and naturally in my work as a psychologist, I see people with huge amounts of psychopathology, and in some cases that can be really helpful because it can get them access to resources and tools that they wouldn't otherwise get, through NDIS, which is more of an intervention type model, which is super helpful sometimes. And then other times it can be very shaming. And it can have people feeling like, oh, there's something inherently wrong with me. And one of my very good peers talks about IFS as being such a nice model to describe like the protector parts or the exiles to people who perhaps don't have the structure intellectually to make sense of what's happening to them internally, and that it can give language and a sense of meaning to these experiences that they have, where these parts, like we'll talk about them as like mini versions of ourselves. I tend to think of it as like my 8-year-old self or my 12-year-old self that gets triggered in certain situations. Like in terms of your own experiences with clients, like what is it like to walk on that journey with them and see them do this for themselves?
So good.
Yeah.
I just love it so much. It's amazing. I think what you're speaking to about giving the clients language, but I find that in terms of client breakthroughs, like that's sometimes one of the biggest ones. They go, oh, that's just a part of me. It's not all of me. Like it really does disarm any shame they might have around it. They might have an angry part, and they're like, particularly women, I think women struggle to express anger, and if they do, they feel terrible for it. But it's like, no, that's just a part of you, and it's doing a job. It's trying to protect you. And they're like, wow, that's just a part of me. And then they can create a little bit of separation and not feel so flooded by that emotion as well, which is just a great way to help them cope with things too. But also just like throughout the process, because when people have their self-energy, and whenever I run a session, I always take people through it like a grounding practice first, because it helps them to calm and get into self. But it's beautiful to witness, and I love it so much, but it's not me doing it, it's them, because their self is there, and it's like their self is kind of running the session. They'll just tell me what the part said, and then it can lead me to the next question. I've never got wondering what to do next, because their system will lead. And like you can't really go wrong if you let their system lead. And that includes if the protector part comes in and goes, no, not talking. It's like, okay, we never ever push past that. But like seeing them, interact with their parts, understand them. They have these moments where like, oh, wow, it's just trying to help me. Oh, wow, it's because of this memory. I forgot all about that when that teacher said that to me, but it's still affecting them. And then being able to take, go and speak to their exile and give them what they need. And then like what their parts come out with, like when they say what new role they would like, or, the younger self, even the wisdom that they have internally is just incredible. And that's so empowering for them to see that's coming from them. They're like, wow, this is so cool.
I heard you use the term self. I wonder if you could explain what that means to you. And I guess different people have different versions of this, but from your understanding and from IFS's understanding, how do you see the self?
So IFS explain it as self-energy. Well, it's who you are without, all of your conditioning or your trauma. And it's Richard Schwartz, who is kind of the discoverer of IFS. He describes it as the 8 C's. Let me try and remember them. Compassion, calm, creativity, curiosity, clarity, connectedness. I always get to 6 and I can remember the other 2.
It's not a test.
Google it, guys.
Yeah.
But that's a really good explanation. But I like to say other words like what makes you feel like you're in self. Like a lot of people use the term soul or love or flow state, or, just like whatever. Whenever you're feeling like yourself and you're feeling really good and you're feeling really open and connected to other people and you're responsive, not reactive, all those kinds of things. Like something often people feel like when they're really immersed in their work, or they're being creative, or for some people might be going for a surf, and they're just like in the groove of it. But like that's accessing self-energy. Or when, your friend tells you something really vulnerable and you just feel so much compassion for them, and it's like that's self-energy too. My favorite is curiosity, and I always often start with that, just try and access within you a gentle curiosity. Sometimes people think that's like the part needs to tell me, and I'm like, no, just gentle curiosity.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's one of the biggest things I learned from my own therapist, who happens to work in the method that I use, which is intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, and also uses internal family systems. And he taught me such patience with myself. And what that opened up for me was just such unreal spiritual connected experiences, like where I was accessing, I guess people would call it God or higher power. And so it's really interesting how I've mixed like my sense of self with also like God and I don't know, people might call them, you know, guardian angels or whatever your language is around it. But it's just been absolutely like mind-blowing how much the experience of relating to these parts of myself and where I feel that in my body, what that's activating, also then activated this like capacity to move beyond just the self. And what that did also with my client work and my relationships and my connectedness. It's just, I think, like when we talk about IFS, it can feel very cognitive. And I think what it opens up for me is something much deeper. And I've heard rumours, I don't know how true it is, about Richard Swartz having the method downloaded to him from Spirit, maybe during a psychedelic journey, I'm not sure, or a journey of some description. And I don't know if that's true, so I'm sorry, Richard Swartz, if I'm talking shit. It's just a rumour. But it's just really, I also find that deeply fascinating, like how he came across the method, what the rationale was, because as a psychologist, we come from such an evidence-based environment where it's like we need the rationale, we need the facts, and then at the same time, can the data from the client not be the evidence, right? So I guess that's like my internal battle. Like in terms of healing relationships with others, what have you found about IFS that helps a client to be more, I guess, connected with others or present with others that you think is important for perhaps listeners to know or understand?
Yeah, one of the first things I say to people if they're wanting to know about IFS or they just want like a tip is the first thing I say is use parts language. You can use that in all your relationships. So any person you are dealing with, you can, rather than saying to them, this is a very different experience to say, I'm really angry at you because of what you did yesterday, versus there's a part of me that feels really angry about what happened yesterday. Could we talk about that later? Like that person is far more likely to be able to receive that. And you're also using parts language, so then you're separating a little bit from that part, knowing it's just a part of you, being regulated enough to have the discussion. Like that's a game changer. But in terms of relationships, and I have a lot of clients, I'm not a relationship therapist, but I have a lot of clients ask me for relationship advice. But one of the things I recommend is Richard Schwartz's book, You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. And he talks in the book about how when we're fighting with our partner, it's not us that's fighting with our partner and vice versa, it's our exiles. So if you can just imagine 2 5-year-olds having an argument, they're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing when we're fighting with our partner. It's our exiles that are being triggered, and it might be your 5-year-old self that something happened to them where they received a message or they interpreted a situation that I'm not lovable or I'm not good enough. And when those parts of us are triggered, it's very activating, it's very overwhelming, and it will overwhelm the system if it needs to. And that's just your system doing its job. And so then you have protectors that come in that might be angry or might be like really upset or they might shut down.
Yeah.
And so like whenever clients ask me, I'm like, listen to this book or read this book because it's really good advice. And that book basically talks about that in order for us to have good relationships, we need to do the work to heal our exile, so then we're not projecting those things onto our partner and expecting them to fill the wound of, you know, I'm not good enough or I'm not lovable. Like that is our work.
Oh, like honestly, when I listen to you speak, Megan, it's like hearing like my own history of my parts and the reworking that I've done and then how that's also shifted how much less I project onto my beautiful husband. Poor thing, he's tolerated me for a long time, and my parts, I should say.
Yeah.
But I really love the language that you use around, like, a part of me is really angry with you for X, Y, and Z, because I think that also, you know, helps us to show that that's not the only thing we feel towards our partner, like that there might be anger and there's also a lot of love or a lot of grief, and perhaps inadvertently through communicating in that way, we also communicate that, which I think is really transformational, because I think it's really hard for someone to receive something like that and then project back, because it's like, oh, she's not totally angry with me. It's just a part of her. So I really like that. When you talk about the book, you are the one you've been waiting for. Yeah. I remember in a therapy session of mine where my therapist used IFS, he used that experience of, like, adult me taking, you know, that part of me home, my I guess it's my exile, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know, because I haven't trained in the method. I've read a few books. And at that point in time, I was like, fuck, yes. Like, I don't have to wait for a savior. Like, I am my own savior. And it was just, like, transformational in terms of then how I started to relate to myself. Like, in terms of your work with clients, what is that like to see a client move from perhaps a victim stance where they're, like, waiting, you know, for Prince Charming or a job or money, winning the lottery to come and rescue them, and then taking that self-initiative, self-determination on? Like, what's that like as a therapist to see?
Amazing to see. And also for them, one of my favourite things a client can come back and say to me, they're like, I've started using IFS on myself. And I'm like, yes, that's the goal. Like, that's what we want you to do.
Yeah.
And being able to, like, go back, one of the things I do when we're doing, like, what we call an unburdening process, when we find the memory that is kind of causing this protector to act in the way that it's acting, I get you as your adult self to go back into the memory if the system feels safe enough to do so. And then I'll say to my client, whatever your younger self needed in that moment, because often they'll feel unsafe or unloved or whatever it is, whatever they needed in that moment, can you give them to that now? So it's like you are visualizing yourself giving your 5-year-old self a hug, or telling them that there's nothing wrong with them, or reassuring them in whatever way that you need to. And I don't tell them what to say. I just let their self energy lead that, because they know they were there, or their younger self was there and is still kind of in that time and space, if you will. But then being able to do that and then bring their younger self out of that situation and do the unburdening process, like releasing the belief that they're holding, it's so transformational. And when you watch them do it, I do encourage my clients to shut their eyes because they can go inward. I watch their entire face change, like their face softens, their shoulders drop. It's like, you've been carrying that around for 30 years and now it's gone. And it changes your physiological state. Like, it's quite amazing. And then I always say to them, if it's helpful, because I find it very helpful, I give my clients questions to ask their parts every day for the next 7 days, because that helps with the integration process. But I say, if you can, say if it was your 5-year-old self you worked on, get a photo of your 5-year-old self or yourself around that age and talk to her, because I find it much easier to connect. And I do that myself. I've got photos of myself at certain ages, and when I can talk to her, and when I'm feeling like, say, a big emotion coming up in me, or I'm really anxious, I'm like, is that me? Or is it, no, it's actually my 5-year-old self. And then I'll talk to her, and it's like, you become the gentle parent for your younger selves, all these younger versions of yourself. And I think that that's what, I've said that to someone before, like, we find the methodology or the modality that we most need ourselves. And for me, what IFS has gifted me is I've been able to reparent myself. And that's the thing I needed the most. And once you can do that, like, your system is so much calmer.
Yeah, your energy is so calm. Like, being in the space with you just feels so regulating, and then so to be someone who's well versed in what, quite serious mental health issues look and sound like bipolar affective disorder. I mean, it seems so far removed from the person I'm sitting with here today. Like, what is that like for you to see your own, and I would call it like a transformation, right? Because that's like massive to go from this identity to then someone who's leading the path for other people to do this work. What's that like?
Yeah. It's pretty cool, but I don't really think about it. Like, I don't know. This is just something that feels bigger than me. And it's like, I didn't really know. I was working with, Blake. I was working with Blake when I did that journey where it was like, you need to go and share your story. And the reason why was because I'd moved through a lot of that shame with the bipolar. And then during that group program, I remember one of the journal prompts that day was, what are you most proud of? And I shared a little bit of my story on my little video in the Telegram group. And I said, I had been diagnosed with bipolar. Like, I haven't had a single episode. This is probably back in 2022. And I just said, I'm proud of myself. Like, that's pretty cool that I kind of forged my own path, and, I haven't even been medicated, and I'm well, and I've been well. And that was just such a big thing for me, because when I was diagnosed, I just thought I can't do anything anymore. Like, because I didn't know about this condition, I thought, well, I could start a business or I could go do this, but then depression could come along and wipe me out again. Yeah. And so I just had no confidence anymore. And it was like showing myself that I could move past that. Then sharing that story, and I actually had a number of the group like private message me after, and a couple of them said, your story made me cry. Like, that's amazing. And then I was like, oh, there's something in that. And then I was like, after that journey, I was like, no, you need to share your story, but also like remember how alone you felt in that time. And I didn't know about Kelly Brogan's work, like I didn't know about any other path. And I mean, I know they're all doing the best they can, and all these doctors think they are doing the right thing and they just want to help people. But my psychiatrist had the energy of a disapproving school teacher. And it just it further perpetuated that shame, and it further perpetuated. I remember I was going on a trip and I was having a bit of a high at the time, and it was like already booked. It was done. I'm going. And I went and saw him a couple of days before because it was just a regular kind of check-in. And then he's like, I don't think you should go. And I was like, well, I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's just like, well, I don't think that's a good idea. But it was like, really? And I just thought,
cringe.
I left there quite angry, and I was like, now I just feel like I don't want to tell you when I'm having a high.
Oh, 100%, right?
Because you're going to like be disapproving of it. And it's like, imagine how many people are having those experiences and how alone they feel. And I just thought, I've got to tell this story because people need to know that there's another way. And if what's working for you or what's not working for you now, like, you can explore outside that box.
Oh, 100%. Like I haven't been on the same journey as you, but I've been on something of my own quest to uncover, my own triggers or difficulties and what helps or doesn't help. And it's just unreal how much when we take sovereignty for our own wellness and start initiating things that make sense for us, feel aligned, help us move more in directions that, are affirming rather than judging. And sometimes that can look like traditional psychiatry. I mean, I'm so blessed that I have a couple of psychiatrists who are just fucking legends who I work alongside with. And I also meet a lot of people who've had your experience. So it's like, where's that middle ground? Like, and I think it really is my biggest learning as a therapist is how much can I trust that the person knows the perfect thing for them.
Yeah.
And can we just create safety in their body, which I loved you talking about the body in terms of that intervention where you see their body relax and it's like all that, energy, that anxiety that's been keeping them stuck and tight and diseased, you know, because this kind of energy causes such chronic disease. You know, release, how much more that frees up creativity and fun and spontaneity and play and sexuality and exploration. And I think it's just, I recently had a bit of a verbal tantrum on a listserv that I'm on with some other psychotherapists, and my main message at the end was, can we trust in clients to know what they need for them moment to moment, whether that's medication, whether that's somatic practice, whether it's yoga, whether it's hiking up a mountain or taking psychedelics, or, you know, that essentially we know the perfect thing for us. It's just, can we get regulated enough to know what that is? And what I'm hearing from you is IFS is a great tool to create that regulation in the body. So that then people can reclaim, you know, their autonomy and know
absolutely, and
the right path for them.
And I also think, yes, it's a great tool to start helping you regulate if you're not there. And I get it, because I spent most of my life in fight or flight, not knowing that. But it's also that, and you talk about this, peeling back that conditioning. And a lot of us, particularly women, we're taught not to trust our bodies. We're taught not to trust ourselves through our conditioning. And so then it's like we want people to know that they have the answers within them, but it's like getting to them to that place. It requires regulation, but it also requires that peeling back. I call it an excavation, because we're peeling back all those layers. Oh
man, I go on excavating missions every day with my clients, and it's something you can tell by my reaction because I, you know, was raised in that Catholic private school environment where we were certainly conditioned to behave like good women, and good women behaved in certain ways. And I was actually connecting with a peer of mine on the weekend who facilitated an experience with me, and she and I were talking about this and resonating with that whole repression. And for those of you who don't know, like, repression is really where we stop sharing or experiencing or being with our internal impulses, feelings, motivations, and it's like we relate to them as problematic or something to be exiled, when they're all normal. Like, it's all part of being a human. We're complicated. We all have and I was just chatting with you and Dean, who runs the Nest, about this, which is where we're recording, about, you know, that we all have impulses that are, you know, violent and sexually deviant. And it's like, how much can we allow all of those parts to operate inside of us without being harsh or judgmental of them, and just learn, you know, what are you trying to tell me? What do you want me to know? So I just
letting them be there.
Yeah.
Like, I have parts that come up, and you know, I might do this little inventory. I'm like, okay, what's present for me? I can feel maybe some emotion going on in my system, and I'm like, okay, I can see my inner critics here, and there's another part here, and like, even if they're kind of, I mean, I've gotten a lot better at it through this work, but even if they're not, I guess, socially acceptable parts, I'm just like, okay, like, I see you, I hear you, like, you're welcome here. And I have clients in sessions, they're like, oh, this part's coming up, and they're like, oh, it's really annoying. I'm just like, I just want that part to know they're welcome. Like, and that's the thing, when we try and suppress parts of ourselves, it takes so much energy. So if you're someone that goes to bed at night and you're so exhausted and you don't know why, you're probably trying to suppress a whole bunch of parts. So there's that piece, but also if you think about, like, say a child is a really good example. If a child is like screaming, or even if you're in an argument with someone and you're saying something to them and they're just not hearing you and they're just not understanding you, often your instinct is to get louder. And our parts are the same. So if you're going to try and like push it away, like, it's just going to feel more and more intense. I use your inner critic as an example, but I say this to people and people think I'm mad, but like, your inner critic, it's like there and it's so loud, but rather than trying to push it away, because when it says things, it's quite awful and you're like, oh, I don't want to hear that. But imagine giving your inner critic a hug and just watch what happens in your system, or even an angry part. like that's what it needs. It's actually in pain. Give it a hug. Love on it.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those parts are often just so pained.
Yeah. And they're just trying to help us no matter what they're doing. I always say, like, even if you've got a part that you don't like, hate the behavior, but don't hate the part. Because the part is just trying to protect you.
Yeah. I even like often invite people to relate to like their aggressive or sadistic impulses as like, what is this anger trying to communicate here with you? And I probably talk more about the emotion and the impulse of what that's showing you, what that's revealing about the relationship, the situation, your life, you know, your mental state. And it's really interesting to see how then that helps people reframe like that, whether that's a part or a feeling, whatever language you use, you know, and it's really powerful for people to see that's functional.
Yeah.
These parts are functional. They help me operate. They help me get through life. And when we've had very traumatic histories, then it makes sense why perhaps these are more, you know, operate in certain ways where maybe we get really depressed and we get suicidal. Like from your understanding, how do you explain that suicidality or that depression to people who are working, you know, from an IFS framework?
Well, it's just a part.
Yeah.
Like people are afraid of that. And like I will talk to this, but IFS is really gaining some popularity, which is wonderful.
It is.
But I think there's a lot of people out there trying to practice it and they haven't actually been trained in it. And if you're not that familiar with it, when you're actually working with IFS, particularly with exiles, it can trigger other parts in the system. And that can mean a part might get triggered that's so suicidal. There's also parts that can get triggered that can self-harm. And it's because that emotion, it's just a bit too much. So like, yeah, you have to practice it in a safe way. But like those parts are just trying to protect you from something. And it might just be that there's an exile underneath that's very tender. So we can work with it, but just, I always say this, when things are very tender, like go slower, just move a little bit slower. And just, we never push past it. Like maybe ask it what it's afraid of. Can you offer it some compassion? Like it's just trying to protect you. And yeah, don't go any further than what your system allows. Like maybe touch on it, but then come back to it later on.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that real gentle approach, like almost like what we would do with like a wounded animal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like showing it, you know, some love, but not being too intense. And again, with our parts, like relating to them in that kind of gentle to and fro. I'm here.
Yeah.
I love you. I accept you. Yeah. And I also accept if you're not quite ready to reveal yourself. I liked your mention about whether or not, you know, someone's trained in a method versus when they're kind of cowboying it and just kind of experimenting. Like, are there any dangers in practicing IFS when perhaps you haven't got the proper training or grounding to kind of work in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. But more than anything, I think the biggest takeaway from my training, and they really kind of ride this point home, was that, well, self-energy, like that is the safest way to practice. Yeah. And self-energy is so healing. Not self-like parts, self-energy, because there is a difference, and we often have self-like parts that can come in. Also not pushing past protectors and really honouring the system. But knowing your own parts and knowing that when your parts have popped up in session, because they do, your clients might say something they might tell you something that happened that's very traumatic, and you have parts that come up because we're human, of course we do. But being able to just quickly attend to that part and just say, hey, I see you in your mind, and come back to the session with the client. Just let that part be there, but you can stay in self. Like that's the safest way to practice. Yeah, that, and I guess lots of experience. I'm really lucky in the sense that I learned it, practiced it for nearly 3 years, and then did my training. So I kind of did it in reverse. Yeah. But it was just in this group. But thankfully, like the women that I practiced with, like one of them had very, very severe childhood trauma.
Okay.
And I didn't realize that at the time, how beneficial that has been for me moving into this work and just
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and watching her change as well. Like, she was so dysregulated at the beginning. Every sentence she spoke, she would do this big sigh after it because she was just that dysregulated. And then, you know, within a few months, like, she'd stopped doing that, and she just was so much more like thoughtful in her, like the way she would speak, and it was amazing.
I think that's such a beautiful process to be in, right? When we also see our peers
absolutely
benefit, and I guess that's probably the co-occurring benefit of working as a therapist, that in our own training there's a concurrent, usually, I mean, I've tended to be in therapy myself the whole time, and I'm still in therapy, and yeah, like watching myself grow and my peers and their learnings and where they're at and sharing that. I think that's a beautiful trade-off.
Absolutely. And then because you're, I guess, in the same space, I have a colleague I work with. We meet once a week and just practice and discuss cases and, you know, support each other. But also we do a little message check-in every day and just say what parts are present for us. And it's like, I think being in those spaces, you create the safe space, they create the safe space, and it's like you then you're able to expand your energy for that, and then you can then hold that for other people. Like, it's quite incredible.
So looking at the benefit of that connection with peers. I had a conversation with another one of, for people who don't know, Megan and I were both coached by the same person, Blake Worrell Thompson. I'll give him a bit of a plug, which I'm sure he'll be
awesome.
he'll be keen about. But one of his friends, clients, I guess it's interchangeable, talks about the energetic shifts that happen in community. Yes. And I'm really big on this, mostly because of the experiences I've had in community, whether it's in meditation or breath work or women's circles. And I think that moves towards even just those, like, you know, when it's you and a colleague and you're both, you know, caring for one another, and how much that can protect you energetically in general. So I guess for listeners, it's really about creating these communities around you where people really believe in you and love you and care for you, and also how that can translate into better health and better wellness. And
it's so healing. And when I was, if you're familiar, Sharon Stanley, she's like a somatic therapist. One of her books, it's incredible. I think it's called Body-Centered Practices for Healing Trauma or something like that. But she talks about we experience trauma in relationships, and we can't heal that on our own. We have to heal that in safe relationships. And that's like where our brains create those neural pathways. And often, most of us grew up, like particularly our generation, love was conditional. And it was like, if you're not well behaved, or if you don't do exactly as I say, then like we receive these messages that we're unlovable. And that's traumatic, like whether people want to acknowledge it or not, it is. And to be able to start to show up in your adult life in community where we're not, and I definitely experienced this in my kind of group with Blake when I was working with him. Like, it was like I could show up in this group setting and not just be accepted or tolerated, but be celebrated for my authentic self. Like, there's something so healing about that. And I think that I really think there is a culture shift really starting to happen with that. People are starting to understand that and move towards that again, which is beautiful.
I mean, that's what I'm obsessed with, is creating community and linking people in with each other. And I'm like, I think one of the most wonderful and difficult things about me is my intensity. But I also see those parts as being beautiful and very protective of myself and of others, and wanting, you know, I think those protector parts in me that want healing for me and then also want to heal others. And part of that is learning that that's not my choice, that people have the choice, and I'm just here to go, here's what I'm offering, here's what Megan's offering, here's what, you know, Blake or whoever it is offering, and would you like to come along for the ride? Like, in saying that, for people who are interested in looking at IFS or starting an IFS journey, where do you recommend they begin?
So you can look at, there's the IFS Institute website that's got some resources. Richard Schwartz has written a lot of books. There's also some other practitioners who are very well known that have wrote about IFS. Frank Anderson is one of them. He's a psychiatrist in America, and he's just incredible. There's loads of podcasts out there. I'm a real big fan of Bessel van der Kolk's work as well, and he speaks about IFS in The Body Keeps the Score. I write about IFS on my blog. I mean, these are all personal, viewpoints, but if you wanted to check that out, you could. But yeah, IFS Institute. Also, if you wanted to find a practitioner in your local area, there's a list of practitioners all around the world that practice IFS, and also online ones as well.
And if people want to work specifically with you, how do they find you? How should they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time on Instagram, and my Instagram is Mental Health Coach Megs, and my website is just meganpasierbek.com.au.
Okay.
And you can find all my blog, how to work with me, all my kind of coaching packages and things like that.
Okay.
And you can book a discovery call if you just want to have a chat and find out more about it and discuss your specific challenges and things you want to work through.
And I've seen on your website, people can commit for different levels of kind of therapy, one session or by blocks of sessions. So it sounds like people can kind of engage with you in a way that feels like resonates for them.
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, something that people could start looking at in terms of starting to explore their parts, is there any simple exercises that you would recommend to people to start initiating this journey for themselves?
Yeah, sure. You can start to use parts language. So just start thinking of yourself in parts, and whenever you have an emotion come up or a thought, even a thought, oh, what part of me is thinking that? You might notice a judgment coming, you're oh, there's a part of me that thinks that. Just get curious. It's also, if you've got small children, it's a beautiful thing to practice with them. So when they're getting really overwhelmed with their big emotions, sitting with them and going, oh, there's a part of you that feels angry. Tell me about that. Getting them to identify that there's a part of them. It's so beautiful, and such a beautiful tool to share with them and start to get them to think of it that way. And also there's loads of meditations. I've got a free one on my website that you can download. I've got an ebook on your inner critic, but there's a free inner critic meditation if people want to use that.
Amazing.
There's also loads of IFS meditations. Even Richard Schwartz has some on Insight Timer.
Okay.
And there's loads of podcasts out there. I mean, if you search Richard Schwartz, he's been interviewed loads. Frank Anderson speaks about IFS a lot. Even Gabby Bernstein, she's written a book on IFS. I think it's called Self-Love.
Okay.
Loads of resources out there that you can explore. And as I said before, the IFS Institute is a good website that will lead you to other avenues as well.
Yeah, okay, amazing. And I guess looking back now, if you could kind of tell that, was it 19 when you were with the psychiatrist getting that diagnosis?
Oh no, that was it was in 2019.
2019.
So it was I think I was 35 or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could go back and tell that younger version of yourself anything, what would you have wanted to know back then that you know now that would have been really helpful for you at that time?
I guess just in terms of the bipolar, I would have, if I knew Kelly Brogan existed, who is a psychiatrist, if you're not familiar, she's a psychiatrist who swore by prescribing and thought she was doing the right thing, but she's gone the other way now. Now she looks into nutrition and supplementation and healing your stuff. And she's written a load of books, but I guess her work, but also just I would probably just tell my younger self, you don't need to listen to another person. You just need to heal. You just need to heal. And I hadn't even fully acknowledged what I needed to heal back then. I didn't have much self-compassion at all. But if I could tell her anything, you just need to heal. Go take care of yourself. And the rest will take care of itself.
I even, at the start of this conversation, it's not on camera or pod, you talked about this notion of being selfish, and I wonder, you know, how much even just being with yourself back then may have been experienced by some of your parts or your protectors as being disallowed, or and this is kind of like the interesting part in our work, right, is that in peeling back the layers, in doing that excavation that you described, it does really show us, like, wow, there's all these kind of layers of things I've learned, ways I thought I was meant to behave, like experiences I've had that have distanced me from my parts, that have distanced me from my exiles, from my protectors, from myself. Like, is there anything that you want to kind of leave listeners with as we finish up today, Megan?
I think the biggest piece, and I think this is the absolute key to healing, and without it, you won't get to where you need to go. And this might be really hard for some people to hear, or their protectors, but the key is self-compassion. And even if you can just get like a millimeter of it to begin with, like that is the thing. Like, and often a lot of us don't have that or don't have access because we were never shown that. We were never shown compassion. So how could we possibly give ourselves compassion when we were never offered that? But like, that's the thing that we need to learn. And I think that if everybody could access self-compassion, like imagine what the world would be like. Because when we can access self-compassion, we can access true compassion for others. And this isn't sympathy or a I feel sorry for you or any of that like energy, because let's be honest, like that can feel a little bit ick to be on the receiving end of.
Oh, fully, yeah.
But like genuine compassion where we're not getting snowed under by someone else's stuff, but we can just sit with them and be with them in whatever they're going through and be like, yeah, man, that sucks. And I feel you. And sometimes that's the most healing thing, you know, people just being able to be seen in that.
Oh, 100%. And I think you touched on it earlier in therapy or in relationship or in a group container or whatever means you look at doing this healing, that often it's in that mirrored self-compassion. And this was transformational for me with my own therapist, seeing how his compassion for, you know, all the parts of me that I had denied, been ashamed of, repressed, and just seeing how he held it in just his tender, loving care. I was like, oh my gosh, I can do that too. Like,
what a gift.
I credit him with just so much of my healing and just have so much unreal gratitude to him. And anyway, you know, like you have these people in your life who come in and you're like, you've really transformed my life. And I don't think you can ever fully appreciate how much that is. And I think it's a real gift as a therapist also then to be able to offer that space to clients. But I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming, because I know you've come also from the Sunshine Coast, which is a huge journey to the Gold Coast. It looks close on a map, but it's actually like a huge commitment. And I'm when people give me their time, I just see that as one of the most beautiful gifts, because it's just such a precious resource. And so I'm so incredibly grateful. So for listeners, you can reach out to Megan on Instagram through her website. I'll put links to everything at the bottom of the YouTube. It'll also be on the bio for this podcast episode. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mel.
If anyone wants to work with me, my website is www.zensohouse.com, or I'm on Instagram at zensohouse. Thank you.
Thank you.